Lisa. I'm the CEO and founder of Lisa College Consulting, and I would like to welcome you to my new podcast, Culture by Neurodesign. And what I'm going to do in this podcast is explain how a single DEI initiative, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, will not only boost your team metrics, think happiness, healthiness, and engagement, but also your business metrics. And pretty much any business metric that you think about will be benefited, but in particular, talent management, talent attraction, and talent retention, innovation, and resilience to thrive in the face of all of those unknown changes that are coming up. So that single DEI initiative that I mentioned is cognitive inclusion, and it is inspired by best practices that we can learn when we look at neurodivergent thinking styles, such as autism, such as ADHD, such as dyslexia, and more as well. And many of us are directly or indirectly impacted by our own lives or people in our lives who have these conditions. And so we may well feel some affinity with one or more of these conditions. But what I want to do is put it all together and talk about how you can holistically learn and shape your culture inspired in this way so that it just becomes even better than it currently is. So this is the start of the podcast, and what I want to do is to introduce myself to you. My first theme is called Meet Lisa, My Journey from Science to Inclusive Leadership, and that is exactly what I'm going to talk about for the first 6 episodes. If you're going to spend time listening to me, and if there's a chance that we are going to work together, I think it's important that you know who I am, a bit about my personality, my experience, about what I stand for, about the kind of partner that you would be getting if we do actually work together. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the first 6 episodes. Now, this first episode is called From Molecules to Mindsets, My Eclectic Journey from Science to Leadership. It is a little bit of a convoluted path, and I'm going to just talk through where I started and how I got to this position of being CEO of my own consultancy in the area of inclusion, which is very far from where I started. Okay, so let's start back when I was a teenager, even before I was a teenager, really. I'm a scientist at heart. And I still would describe myself as a scientist at heart. I love science. When I got to be older at school, I studied all the sciences. I did very well at them. And I went to university at the University of Oxford, and I studied biochemistry and molecular biology. I loved it. I loved the structure, and I loved the detail. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And so I decided to stay on at the University of Oxford and do a doctorate, which I did not love. And just to make sure that I really didn't love it and that I wasn't possibly going to leave something which actually I could grow to love, I also did a postdoctorate. The doctorate and the postdoctorate were focused on immunology and parasitology, and I just did not like the practical aspect of doing research at all. It was slow, it was frustrating, and it was really different from the leaps that I expected to be able to make when you read the research literature. Those incredible insights which you see in the research literature, that was what I wanted, and that was really what I missed in just the day-to-day of doing research. So after 6 years, I think, of researching either as a doctorate student or as a postdoc, I decided to leave. What I did love still in research was looking for patterns when I was reading research papers. I love looking for patterns, making connections between different papers, drawing insight from the papers and thinking about what the next steps, what the solutions could be. I always loved that, and I still love doing that. It still fascinates me what you can find in research literature, in business literature, and so on. And you can see that love, I think, reflected throughout all of the subsequent career, which I'm going to describe to you in the rest of this episode. So at that time, I was dating a Dutch guy. I'm British. I lived in Britain. But I was dating a Dutch guy, and we wanted to live together. And he had just got tenure at a Dutch university. It's not something you throw away from research, and I didn't like my research job, as I've just said, so it was quite a no-brainer. I moved to the Netherlands, and I wanted to stay in the Netherlands under my own steam. You know, I didn't want to stay as his dependent. So I looked as hard and as quickly as I could. I had 3 months. I looked as hard and as quickly as I could for a job that I could do. And I applied for a job at Elsevier. It is the world's largest scientific, technical, and medical publisher. It does a lot of good things, but it is the largest, so it's also the target for a lot of emotion, negative emotion. But I applied for a job there as a publisher, and I got the job because I had the qualifications. So I spent 4 years as a publisher of a portfolio of animal journals and also a portfolio of forensic medicine and science journals. It was all great experience, but after 4 years, I was a bit bored of that because it was pretty much the same every year. It was the same conferences, the same meetings, the same timing of the year when you did the budget, the same timing of the year when you worked at the editors' payments, honoraria. So after 4 years, I thought I had enough, and I looked around for another job in the same company, and there was a position which just appealed to me, and you'll see why in a minute when I describe it. It's because of all of the love of patterns and evidence. The position was using the kind of quite early databases which we had in scientific publishing to develop analytics for journal publishers and for the learned societies that we often partnered with to publish their journals. So if you look at the scientific literature, there are authors are listed and their affiliations are listed, and they refer to other publications that they have drawn on for methodological insights or for ideas in their reference lists. And so you can say quite a lot about who is working with who, which research has been the most influential, whether somebody's research is more or less impactful than somebody else's. Just by doing some analyses on these data. And I applied for that position and I got it and I loved it. So I was able to develop analytics and learn how to explain them to journal editors and to learned societies in a way that they could understand and be able to act on. So I did that for a while, and then I was perfectly positioned when a whole new venture started up in that company. And the new venture was to build a whole new business, building derivative products from the large scientific, technical, and medical databases of literature that we had. So I became a product manager in that new venture, and that was what I did in one shape or form for about the next 10 years. It was a really natural fit for me. I followed my heart, and that's what you can see me doing through all of the steps that I've taken in my career. I describe this as an eclectic journey, but it only looks eclectic if you don't know what's motivated me and what my passions are. That's the common factor amongst all of the different moves. But I became a product manager in this new venture, and eventually we built a product which was used by university research officers, other research institutions, governmental organizations, research funders. It was used by them to gain insights into research. So who was doing the research in a particular field? Who was collaborating with who? I think that my university is really strong in nano, for example, but is that true? And where are the other strong nano universities in the world? Quite often we saw that universities had assumptions about things, but they weren't always true. They weren't always current, or they weren't always complete. And of course, by looking at data, this was the first time that universities were really able to look at global data and benchmark themselves. That was really a fantastic evidence base, which was able to improve their decision making and mean that they could put their resources into a much smarter direction. That was absolutely fantastic. And within that whole small group of people who were getting that venture off the ground, I quite quickly started to specialize in what we started to call research metrics. So I'm quite clear this is not the same as data. Data's some a sea of information, which if we're lucky is organized into a database, but metrics are something else. Metrics are things which result when you've performed some kind of operation on the data. Maybe you're going to add it together, or maybe you're going to make a percentage of something or some other kind of relative calculation, but a metric is something that you have derived from the data. And a metric is something that you can present in a table or a chart, so that people can draw insights from it, and so that they can take a decision, an actionable decision, and move on. So because of my kind of natural affinity with data and my love of making sense of data and looking for connections between things, I quickly became really, really good at defining metrics and talking about metrics with the research community. And I worked for many years in very close partnership with some wonderful influence in the research community, many of whom I'm still in contact with, to learn about how we should talk about the metrics so that they were actionable, and how we should recommend that those metrics were used so that people felt comfortable that they weren't being used irresponsibly, or taking away from the human insights, which are always such an important partner next to anything that you can do with research metrics. I worked in really close partnership with many people in the research community, so I was able to do a lot of traveling, presentations at institutions. I've done lots of presentations at events all around the world. I've participated in national consultations for governments who wanted to create a framework to improve the research structure and approach of their country. It was a really fantastic opportunity, and I absolutely loved it. The result was that research metrics became a strategic competence of Elsevier. I wasn't the only person working in it, but I was one of the leaders of that. And it was a defensible strategic competence that helped Elsevier to build and maintain the advantage that it was able to gain with that product that I talked about, the new venture. Fantastic. So if I love that so much, why aren't I still doing it, you may well ask. And the reason was that at some point I didn't really feel like I was adding anything more to the world of research metrics. I was still presenting, but I felt like I was almost at the end of the new stuff that I could offer, and it was probably time to let somebody else have a go and build on the start that I had made. And there was a second reason as well. The second reason was that I wanted to build up my people-focused skills. I'd spent all of my career looking at data and with business-focused objectives, and I had this quite big gap in terms of the people-focused side of things. And I really, really wanted to focus on that and equalize both sides of the equation. Really, I wanted to balance those out. So I talked to my sponsor in Elsevier, and we created a role for me as chief of staff of a large department. Chief of staff can mean many things. There's probably as many different job descriptions as there are chiefs of staff. But in this department, what happened quite quickly was that 3 groups were merged into one, and there were 3 quite well-established groups. They had their own systems and their own processes. They'd been around for a long time, so people had very strong connections and relationships within each of those groups, and they were put together quite quickly. So let's say that the resulting group was suboptimal in how it worked together. And so my chief of staff role very quickly became to support the leader of that group in making that working culture much more positive and proactive and results oriented, much more high performance, and also much more happy. As you can imagine, people were not very satisfied in that situation, and there was a lot of disengagement. So that became my job. At the same time, there was something big happening in my personal life. When I started to work as chief of staff, one of the things that happened was I became a mum. I had first a daughter and then a son. And after 2 or 3 years, it became very clear that my son was struggling. He couldn't speak. He couldn't interact very well with the other children at daycare. He didn't seem to know how to play with them. If the leader said, "Put your coat on," he didn't really know what to do. And he was just behaving in a very difficult way. And eventually, we received a diagnosis. It was quite a journey, as many of you will know if you have children who are neurodivergent. But we received a diagnosis, which it was a great relief to receive at that time because it meant we could do something. That he's autistic. He's autistic with learning difficulties. As I say, by that time, it got to such a point, I was relieved to get the diagnosis because it meant that we could stop just doing lots of activity and hoping that something would help, which it didn't, unsurprisingly. And we could actually target the research that we were doing and learn how to change our behavior to help him to be much happier in our family and to interact much more productively in the world. And so I started to research that and I started to change behavior. And the results for him were absolutely remarkable. For example, he learned to speak by making some small changes to the habits of how we try to teach children to speak. It's something that you have to learn. It's not the natural way we teach children to speak. But that's just one example of the massive change that we experienced. Everything was better for him, but it was also better for us as well, for his family, because everybody was calmer, everybody could be more themselves, everybody could do more of what they wanted to do in our family. So that was all looking good. But after a while, I started to think, he's not the only autistic person in the world. What would it look like if you would apply these kind of lessons that I'm learning in a business context to people who are working in Elsevier? And the chief of staff role that I had and the focus of that role was actually a perfect opportunity to try out some of what I was learning, but then apply it to a business context. And I also took on a second voluntary role in Elsevier. So I joined the Disability Inclusion ERG, Employee Resource Group, and I quickly ended up leading that group as well. So as well as having the opportunity to try out changes which were being inspired by what I was learning with my son in the department where I was chief of staff. As lead of the Disability Inclusion ERG, I also had the opportunity to try them out in other departments and much wider a field in the company. And what I found was absolutely astounding. I found that, first of all, there was an incredible number of people who were either neurodivergent themselves in Elsevier or who were somehow impacted by neurodivergence. They were the mother or the father of a neurodivergent child, like I was, or their sibling was neurodivergent, or they knew somebody down the street whose child was neurodivergent, or you name it. An awful lot of people were very, very happy to have a focal point. And I was really privileged that a lot of people shared their story with me at that point. So that was one thing that I learned. Another thing that I learned was that there was absolutely massive impact from even some really quite small behavioral changes that you would make at the beginning of a transformation. They were very, very transformational for people individually. I felt much more calm, much more able to contribute, and much healthier. And the impact on the business outcomes was also very significant. I'm not going to go into that now because that's what I'll talk about later on in the podcast, but it was absolutely incredible. I had never participated in another initiative, a single initiative, which had such wide-ranging impacts on so many different aspects of business. It was absolutely incredible. And that's what I'm doing here. I followed my heart. I followed what the universe threw at me. And I applied the way that I like to learn, the evidence-based way that I like to learn, looking for connections, and experimenting, testing, building, keep on learning, keep on iterating. And here I am with my own business, Lisa College Consulting, hoping to work with you to make your organization more cognitively inclusive so that you too can reap the people and business benefits. Well, I hope I'll see you in the next episode of these first 6, where I'm introducing myself and my career journey. The next episode is entitled DEI and Me, a journey from indifference to insight. As I say, I'll hopefully see you there.